Finishing out 3.2 here with complex numbers. Before we get going, there's one idea that we have to understand here. Okay, we all know that I is equal to the square root of -1, right? We've talked about that. Should be good there. Okay. As you go on, though, we are going to start taking I to powers, other powers besides 1, so like I squared. Okay. Well, this would be the same as the square root of -1 squared, correct?
Correct.
We can agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. What happens when you square a square root?
It becomes part.
No, it cancels out.
It cancels out, right? So that's equal to -1.
Wait, so I squared equals -1?
I squared is equal to -1. Now, we could keep going with this. These are the main two ones that you need to know for sure. Okay, but if I had to keep going, I could do I cubed, which would be I squared times I, right? Agreed?
Yes.
Well, we know that I squared is -1 times I would be -I. Okay, just using, because I squared was equal to -1, so instead of I squared, I wrote -1 times I, -1 times I is -I. Okay, and I can keep going. I can do I to the 4th. Well, I to the 4th is I squared times I squared, correct? We agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yes.
I squared is what? -1, so it'd be -1 times -1, which equals 1.
This is whack.
Okay, I'm not going to keep going because
Thank
you
you.
don't need to know. Probably don't need to know past I squared. Okay, but I'm showing you that this would keep going, and this pattern, these 4 things after I to the 4th are just going to repeat every 4th time. Okay, so I to the 5th is just equal to I. I to the 6th is equal to -1. I to the 7th is equal to -I. I to the 8th would be +1. I to the 9th would start back over again. Okay? You need to at least have memorized I and I squared though, because we're going to use them a lot. Okay? You might occasionally come across an I to the 4th or an I to the 3rd, okay? But I guarantee you use I and I squared every single day. Okay? At least through this chapter. Okay? At least once every day through this entire chapter. So, with that, we can go and start looking at multiplying and solving equations with i's. So, if I have this problem, 15i times -1 plus 2i, okay, don't treat this any differently than if those i's were x's. Okay, you're still going to do what first? Distribute. Randy, can you shut that so I know you're with us? Thank you. Okay, you're still going to distribute here. So, when I distribute, 15i times -1 is -15i. 15i times 2i is
30i squared.
30i squared.
Ooh.
Okay, there's your I squared. We know that I squared is equal to
-1.
Okay, so what is 30 times -1 then?
-30.
So that's actually this, right? And I got rid of my I squared, but just like Olivia's saying, that's not standard form, right?
Yeah.
Standard form would be
Imaginary last.
imaginary last, so this is where people get confused sometimes. It's not 30, right? It's -30 minus 15i. Once it is rewritten in standard form. Okay? No process is different than if you were just distributing something with some other variable like an x until you get to I squared. Okay? I squared is equal to -1, so we have to change that to a -1. Okay? Not too bad, right? We can handle that. Okay, one more like that. I have 4. These out of the way. 4, now I forgot. I think it's 4 minus 12. Yeah. 4 minus 12i times 11 plus 8i. What are we going to have to do here? Foil it. Good. Okay, so as I start to foil this, 4 times 11?
44.
44. 4 times 8i?
32i.
Thank you. Negative 12 times positive 11.
Negative 1.5. Right?
No, that's 11 times 11.
132.
Negative 132i. And negative 12 times positive 8.
Minus
56.
96 I squared.
Negative 96i squared. Okay. Before you start combining like terms, what am I going to ask you to take care of?
Get rid of the squared.
Let's get rid of our I squared. Always get rid of your I squared. You don't ever want I squared. Okay? Just make it negative 1. So negative 1 here would change this negative 96 into a positive 96, right? With no more i's. So now I have 44 and positive 96.
Yeah.
140.
Yeah.
And I have positive 32i minus 132i.
Minus 100i.
Minus 100i. Am I in standard form?
Yes.
And I'm good. Okay, hopefully we're thinking this isn't a lot harder than yesterday.
We have to divide.
Just you wait.
No, but if you had to divide,
No,
if you,
not in this, but like.
I know, but if you did have to divide, if there's an I on top and an I on the bottom, they're just gonna cancel anyways, right? You could divide them. It wouldn't be hard. It'd be just
Is
like
that in the lesson?
no.
No,
Will it be in the lesson ever?
You did some dividing yesterday.
There was some yesterday.
Did we? Yeah.
A little bit here and there.
One second.
There was some
Okay.
fractions.
All right. Now we have 2 examples left, but I'm only going to do 1 from each set because I think you can handle them. I'm not going to say they're super easy, but you're probably going to think they're fairly easy, and I think you can definitely handle them. So if they give me 3x squared plus 25 equals negative 416. Doesn't that just look like a problem that we did in 3.1?
Yeah, what
Okay. We had 3 choices in 3.1 on how to solve a quadratic equation. What were they? I could solve it algebraically.
Factor it.
I could factor it, or I could graph it, right? Those are my 3 choices. Algebraic, factor, graph. Okay? Which one am I going to use here? Algebraic. Why?
There's not a Y.
Because there's no x.
Oh, it doesn't
to the
equal.
first.
Because there's only one version of x, right? There's no x to the first power. Okay, so we can solve this easily because all we have to do is get x by itself and square root, right? Okay, so let's do that. Subtract 25.
Negative 441. Maybe not. Yeah, that's it.
441.
Yeah.
Yeah. Divide by 3. So x squared equals
137.
negative what?
137.
Negative 1. Is it 37 or 47?
Negative 147.
147. Yep. Okay. And then square root. So x squared. Oops. X equals.
Not the square root.
The square root.
Oh, you can't have that though. So you can.
You have to break it down.
Something I.
I'm waiting for something else. We're forgetting something.
The 2 things.
This is not right. Oops.
You can have a negative.
This is not right. I'm missing something. What am I missing?
The negative sign.
Nope.
I.
Aye.
Plus or minus.
Nope. Missing plus or minus. Need your plus or minus because remember there has to be 2 answers. It's quadratic, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have plus or minus. Okay. So now, If you want to just go ahead and take that minus out of that square root right now, that's fine. That's typically how I do it, so I don't have to mess with it anymore. So now I have I square roots of 147, but I need to try to do what?
Break it down.
I need to try to break this down. So let's see if we can find a perfect square that comes out of that. There is one.
9.
Nope.
2.
2 is not a perfect square.
Oh.
3.
49.
Oh wow.
3 is not a perfect square, but that is the one we have to use. It's the square root of 49 times the square root of 3. Square root of 49 is 7. So I have 7 and I have the square root of 3. But I have this I on the outside. Where does that go?
With the 7.
Before the 7 or after the 7?
Behind the 7.
Behind the 7. So I have 7I square roots of 3. Are there?
Snap
Yeah,
it.
still plus or minus. So there's two answers there, right?
Yeah.
There's a positive 7I square roots of 3, and there's a negative 7I square roots of 3. Okay. Can we handle that? Same thing we did in the last lesson, but now there's a negative under our square root, so we get an I.
Do we have to do the one with graphing and are we only doing algebraic?
Well, yeah, because I'm not gonna ask you to graph an imaginary number.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll see.
You suck.
See?
All right. Example 7. Last example I have for you. They give me f of x equals 7x squared plus 70. Directions are find the zeros. How does that affect what we do?
Now you
So
gotta,
you put the
you gotta
0
graph
in
it.
for y.
You put a 0 in for y and then what?
Solve for x.
So does it really affect anything that we do?
No.
Not really. It does not make it any harder. All you have to do is put a 0 here. And now we're back to the exact same place we were in the last problem.
The
This
zero
makes
is
it
just
hurts my head.
Putting a 0 in for y here.
I did this.
Yes.
Zero
I
is
second
simpler
that.
than f of x, honestly.
What?
So 0 is simpler
Yeah, when they say find the zeros, yes. Because finding the zeros means we're finding where the graph crosses the x-axis.
than f.
Well, if it's crossing the x-axis, your y value must be 0. That's why we put a 0 in for y. So I subtract 70, negative 70 equals 7x squared. Negative 10 equals x squared. X equals plus or minus what?
I square root 10.
I square roots of 10. So some of us went ahead and skipped that step, but it would be a square root of negative 10, right?
Yeah.
And we take out the I.
I thought we were
That's pretty
finding.
good. That's pretty good. Okay, how do you put the plus or minus thing on Geo?
What? Those are the zeros.
Oh.
The zeros are where it crosses the x-axis, which is basically the exact same thing we just found in the last problem.
So it's just one word.
They just worded it different.
Wait, so if you were to put this on a graph,
You could though.
Don't mess with your mind with that yet.
Yeah, just stop.
so we were gonna have
Just
to.
stop.
We'll see.
Just stop. Please don't.
This would be terrible.
Can we
Okay.
stop that lesson?
Questions on this lesson?
No.
Okay. You should be able to finish that assignment then. Make sure that assignment is done for me.
You got it.